Before I talk about specific strategies to help you in the IELTS speaking test, let's look at some general do's and don'ts. Things you should do in the test and things you shouldn't do. These will give you a general idea of how to get a high band. In the rest of this course, I will explain these tips in more detail and give you lots of examples. So here are some things that you should try to do in the test if you want to get a high band. Listen to the examiner's questions carefully. This is very important. If you don't do this, you might misunderstand the question. And even if your English is good, you will not get a positive score for your answer. Give relevant answers. You must answer the question that the examiner asked. For example, if the examiner asks where you are from, you have to talk about your hometown, not necessarily where you are living now. This is connected with listening to the question, as I mentioned before. Ask for clarification if you don't understand the question. The examiner is allowed to repeat the instructions twice, so ask for clarification if you need it. You will not be penalized for that. Later in this course, I will show you how to ask the examiner to repeat in a natural way. Express your opinions and give examples to support your ideas. During the speaking test, you will be asked for your opinions on different topics. Giving your personal opinions and supporting them with examples from your experience will make your answers more interesting. Use conversation fillers to give yourself time to think. If you don't know what to say, or if you need time to think, you can say something like, that's an interesting question, or let me think about that. This way, you don't lose points for fluency. I will give you more examples in a later video. Relax and try to enjoy yourself. Yes, I know it's an exam, and it's probably a life-changing exam for you, but it is easier to speak more fluently when you are relaxed, and your pronunciation and intonation will also improve. Try to use interesting adjectives. As I mentioned in the previous video, it helps to use some less common words if you want to get bands 7 to 9. For example, instead of repeating the word difficult all the time, you could try using other words like tricky or challenging. I will talk about synonyms in a later video. Paraphrase if you don't know a word. If you forget a word, it's not a big problem, so don't panic. You can use other words to explain what you want to say. In fact, if you do this well, you will get credit for it. I will talk more about that in a later video. Finally, speak clearly. As I mentioned in the previous video, 25% of your score is based on pronunciation, and good pronunciation also means that the examiner can understand you easily. So, open your mouth and raise your voice if you tend to speak too quietly. You should at the same time avoid giving technical details about your work. The examiner doesn't share your technical knowledge, so if you work in a technical field, for example engineering or IT, be prepared to talk about your work in a way that is clear for everybody and avoid giving technical details. So here are some things you should try not to do in the test if you want a high band. Don't give very short answers. In part 1 of the test, the examiner may ask you some simple questions like, where are you from? But you should answer with more than 1 or 2 words. Here's a good example. Where are you from?
I'm from a city called Krakow, which is in the southwest of Poland. I've lived there all my life.
Don't repeat yourself all the time and overuse simple words. To get a high band, you need to show that you can use different words to say the same thing. So try not to repeat the same words all the time. Don't memorize long answers. The examiner is trained to notice pre-prepared answers and will not give you a positive score. What's more, your intonation will probably sound unnatural, so you will get a lower score for pronunciation. Just don't do this. Don't get stressed if you don't understand the question. As I explained earlier, you are allowed to ask the examiner to repeat the question, so don't panic. Don't make long, frequent pauses. As I explained earlier, it's better to use conversation fillers than to say nothing. If you sit in silence, you will lose points for fluency and coherence. Don't spell your name for the examiner. When the examiner asks for your name at the beginning of the test, just give your full name without spelling it. If there's an English version of your name that you like to use, you can add something like, "But you can call me Michael." Don't use your native language. Use only English during the test. Don't use words and idioms that you are not sure about. If you have just learnt a new word, phrase, structure or idiom, and you are not confident about using it, then don't use it. It's too risky. You can easily use it the wrong way. You should be especially careful with idioms and phrasal vocabulary. Don't write on the task card in Part 2. The examiner will give you a piece of paper for making notes. Don't ask the examiner if what you say is correct. The examiner is not allowed to respond to you unless you need clarification about a question.